joining us remotely. And thank you for those of you who are here in attendance. So we are happy to be here today to talk about the results of 2 clinical trials that we have been doing over the past several years with our funding from the National Institute on Disability and Rehabilitation, Independent Living and Rehabilitation. The symposium agenda today is going to start with our welcome and our panel introductions. We are very excited to have a group of people talking about our studies and sort of helping us think about our next steps and bringing in some critiques to our work. As well as we're going to go over some Enact missions and goals, and then we're going to talk about our clinical trial results, and then have the discussion about those studies, and then we'll do a brief closing. Let me first start with our discussants. Dr. Sarah Lynn Allaire, she's a professor of Enact and has also been at the BU's Clinical Epidemiology Research and Training Center, has an extensive amount of work in the area of arthritis, work maintenance prevention, or work maintenance and work disability prevention. Dr. Belinda Borelli is a professor in the School of Dental Medicine. Dr. Borelli is a health psychologist and does some really interesting work in terms of using mobile health and behavior science to change health behaviors and promote healthy lifestyle. And Dr. Kelly Fitzgerald is Associate Dean of Graduate Studies and Professor of Physical Therapy at the University of Pitt. And Dr. Fitzgerald has done an extensive amount of work in terms of exercise and arthritis and thinking about therapy, clinical therapy, physical therapy in the context of arthritis and evidence-based practice, as well as trying to get people also to adhere to what they're doing. So I'm really excited. I think we have a really interdisciplinary panel to really talk about our work, which is really exciting. So just a little bit about Enact. We're going to mostly talk about our trials, but our mission at Enact is to enhance the lives of people with arthritis through research, training, and community-based activities. And Enact strives to change the paradigm from arthritis research and intervention from a focus on disease and limitation to a focus that emphasizes active living and participation. So our goals when we started Enact 7 years ago were to advance knowledge and use of effective strategies to sustain employment, to advance knowledge and use of evidence-based physical activity adherence strategies, to advance the knowledge of total knee replacement participation outcomes, and to increase the capacity of rheumatological rehabilitation scientists. That was our training program, which is now complete. I'm not talking today about a total knee replacement work. That was done by Dr. Jessica Maxwell, and she does have several publications addressing that area. What I'm going to talk about today is the effective use of strategies for employment and our evidence-based physical activity adherence study trial. So those 2 goals in particular. All right. We were really fortunate with Enact to have wonderful advisory boards. They gave us great advice as we implemented our studies and moved our work forward. So first, our consumer advisory board was comprised of people from a number of different organizations that support people with arthritis and rheumatic conditions, as well as people who are fitness coordinators and instructors at some of the real prominent local fitness centers. So I won't read the names off of there, and we have people from Lupus Foundation, from Spalding Hospital, from Beth Israel, Israel Deaconess Medical Center, Arthritis Foundation. It was really nice to have everyone involved, Scleroderma Foundation. Likewise, our scientific advisory board was phenomenal. We had Teresa Brady from the CDC, we had Scott Happen, Julian Hawker, and Patience Slade, and Wendy Coster and Alan Jetty, all of whom gave us tremendous input and were just instrumental in helping our center. So many thanks to them. And then we had a dissemination advisory board that was chaired by Mary Slavin, and members of that, mostly from BU. We had, but again, really the interdisciplinary helped us quite a bit in terms of School of Communications, Psych Rehab, School of Public Health, and then we had the Arthritis Foundation with Judith Levine. Okay, so that's my brief overall with Enact. A shout out and thank you to all of our advisory boards. Again, it was really helpful to have their input. And now our first clinical trial that we would like to talk about is called the Efficacy of a Work Disability Prevention Program for People with Arthritis and Musculoskeletal Conditions. We call this in short the WORK-IT study, the WORK-IT randomized control trial. And Rowan Alharash is going to talk about this study.
Thank you, Julie, and thanks for everyone who was here in person and for the people that we have joining us online. We're all very excited to announce the results of the WorkIT study, as Julie said, this is one of the two randomized controlled trials that occurred at the time I was with Enact. So just to give you some background about work disability, rheumatic conditions and musculoskeletal conditions like lower chronic back pain are considered the leading causes of work disability in the United States, with about a third of adults with arthritis reporting at least a work limitation. And about 30 to 40% of adults become unemployed within 10 years of being diagnosed. And although arthritis is always linked to aging, the onset of these conditions is most frequently under the age of 65, which is the age that people seek to be promoted and to explore their career growth. So job accommodations may have been proven to extend employment tenure for people without arthritis conditions. And this was explored many times for different diseases in the past. But people with arthritis conditions who are employed frequently report that they do need job accommodation, but rarely have access to it or receive it or even use it if it was prescribed. So there was a dearth of evidence-based programs, and in fact no evidence-based programs used at a wide-scale level for people with arthritis. And in 2003, Professor Sarah-Lynn Allaire developed an intervention through using vocational rehabilitation services to address job accommodations, disability advocacy, and career counseling, and it was very effective at preventing employment cessation. So in Sarah-Lynn Allaire's trial in 2003, the intervention approach included using disability advocacy and job counseling, and it mainly used identification and prioritizing a broad range of work areas and providing solutions for these problems. Now, we thought that physical therapists and occupational therapists know solutions to activity impairments, such as the ones that appear and occur in the workplace for people with arthritis. So physical therapists and occupational therapists treat people with chronic musculoskeletal conditions, such as arthritis, and we thought how that they could deliver a work disability prevention program similar to the one that Sarah-Lynn Allaire developed in 2003. So we developed the WorkIT study, which aimed to examine whether participants randomized to an experimental work disability prevention program delivered by the PTs and OTs had first better work productivity or less work limitation over a 2-year follow-up period in comparison to the controls as our primary aim. And as a secondary aim, we examined if less unemployment over 2 years would occur in comparison to controls. So our methods, we completed a 2-year randomized controlled trial, and the enrollment period started in the beginning of November of 2011, and it extended to just over 2 years. And to be eligible in that randomized controlled trial, the participants needed to report being aged 21 to 65 years old, employed more than 15 hours per week so we can track their employment records, and they needed to be living or working in Massachusetts because that's where the interventionists were working. Self-reported doctor diagnosis of a rheumatic condition, including osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, and others, in addition to chronic lower back pain. And they needed to self-report a concern about their ability to remain employed in the next few years due to their health condition. Now, in terms of the outcomes, our primary outcome was work functioning as measured by the output demand scale of the work limitations questionnaire. An example of this item is the level of difficulty over the past 2 weeks on handling the workload. And for our secondary aim, unemployment outcomes, we were divided into 2 different types. The first one is permanent unemployment, which is work cessation or job loss, and it was accounted for by becoming unemployed during follow-up and remaining unemployed throughout the period of the study and at all the follow-up points. And the second type was any unemployment, which is becoming unemployed at any time in the study at one occurrence. In terms of the intervention and the control group, the intervention group received a 1.5-hour meeting with trained occupational therapists and physical therapists in the community, they used an interview tool called the Work Experience Survey for Rheumatic Conditions, which includes identification of barriers in work and developing solutions and planning for them through their work. And it also included providing these participants with a resource packet, which has disability employment information and resources in the form of leaflets and brochures. And it also included a written action plan for the participant to follow. This meeting was followed up by 2 phone calls, one after 3 weeks and one after 3 months of the meeting, whilst the control group received only the resource packet that the people of the intervention group received as well. So in terms of the interventionists, we had 10 trained, licensed occupational therapists and physical therapists deliver the intervention. They went through an 8-hour training that included information and knowledge about arthritis and work disability. And we went through the Work Experience Survey of Rheumatic Conditions with them, and we explored the solution manual for Work Experience Survey of Rheumatic Conditions. We also went through some vignettes to practice some solution generation process and how that would work in different scenarios and different people. And we also discussed the material in the resource packet and went through how to develop and drive an action plan with the participants. Now, the main component here, the WestRC, the interview tool that is considered the main component of our intervention, I will go through that in detail in a minute. So the analysis that we used was an intent to treat, where 2 sample t-tests was conducted on the 24-month change in the scores of the output demand scale for the work limitations questionnaire, and the Kaplan-Meier and log-rank test for the time from randomization to the occurrence of an unemployment incident. In terms of our consort flowgram, this is what we had in the work study. We randomized 287 individuals. And we ended up with 125 people in the intervention arm at 24 months, and then 139 towards the 24 months, with about 92% retention, which we're very pleased about. And in terms of the results, the sample demographics are here in front of you in the table. As you can see, the age was around 50 years old. The sample was mainly female, white, and had college degrees. And there were no differences in the control and the intervention groups when looking at these characteristics, which confirms our randomization. In terms of the self-reported condition, the most prevalent condition was osteoarthritis, as we anticipated, followed by rheumatoid arthritis and chronic back pain, and followed by these following diseases. For the work limitations questionnaire, output job demands change, which is our primary outcome, these were the scores between the control and the intervention. As you can see here, we did not find any significant differences between the control and the intervention groups for all of our follow-up points at 6 months, 12 months, and at 24. Whilst on the other hand, for our secondary aim, we found that people in the intervention group had less occurrence of permanent job loss, and that was significant at the P level here with 0.03. And in terms of any unemployment, we had a similar trend with significance reaching, with the p-value reaching almost significant here. And as you can see here in the graph, this is the cumulative incidence of time to permanent unemployment and any unemployment. And you can see here the difference between the control and the intervention group. So going back to the work experience survey of rheumatic conditions that I mentioned briefly before, this is an interview tool that was developed by Sarah Hilaire. It was modified from the work experience survey for people with multiple sclerosis. And it contains 8 sections. In front of you here are the first 7 sections, and I'll go through section 8 in a bit. The first section is collecting information about demographics and the work history of the individual, and then you have different sections where the person completes the intended activities in the workplace. So, for example, section 2 is discusses items related to getting ready for work and traveling to and from work, such as the following. And we ask the individual or the participants with arthritis to go through these items and then check the ones that are sometimes or always problematic for them. And then they go through every single section. So section 3 is about workplace access. Can you please check the items that are sometimes or always problematic for you? This includes getting into places with items such as parking, walking, stairs, and opening doors, etc. Section 4 is about completing the actual job activities, such as standing or being on feet for too long, or getting up and down from sitting, lifting and pulling, and so on. Section 4 is about relationships with people at work, including the relationship and how to deal with the supervisor, co-workers, support, and so on. Some of the barriers that we found from our sample included physical job demand barriers. Some of these frequently seen barrier examples was the need to change positions frequently, head neck positioning, being able to move quickly, and being on one's feet. And then the section 8, which is the final section in the WES-RC, is the problem prioritization and solution development. So after each section is completed, the interventionist asks the participant to identify the items that are considered the most problematic or bothersome to that participant. And then that item would be circled and then listed here in section 8 as the major problem. And then after that, discussion would happen between the interventionist and the participant to try to generate solutions. And the interventionist always encourages the participant to develop solutions by themselves with the assistance of the interventionist. And some of the times there was the solution manual that we discussed that I mentioned briefly earlier. It was used as a reference to come up with some solutions if the participant nor the interventionist could come up with solutions. So in conclusion, our work disability prevention program prevented job loss. It had no impact on work functioning. And the next steps would be to identify the implementation channels for the program delivery and establish effectiveness of this outcome. And I want to acknowledge all the Enact staff here. And for your information, you can feel free to download a copy of the work experience survey of rheumatic conditions. It is free for anyone who wants to download it at this following link. And now I give the mic back to Julie Kieser to discuss the boost results.
Before that, thank you, Roland, very much. Nice talk. All right, so I think we're going to just take some time here now to have a discussion on the study that Roland just taught, but don't go too far, Roland. You might. Okay, so I think why don't we just open it up to the panel to share some of their thoughts on the study, and feel free to take it where you want it to go.
Well, go ahead. Just off the bat, even though your primary outcome wasn't achieved, the secondary one is very important because the last time I looked, absenteeism in osteoarthritis alone was about $10 billion a year. So if you got a program that can reduce that, I think that's a really important program. And one of the questions I had though with your method is you excluded or you included people who had a self-report that they're going to have problems with their job over the next 5 years. And I think it would be interesting, in follow-up studies maybe to expand that to people who don't necessarily report that. Because my experience in people with NEOA is if they're early onset, they don't realize sometimes the job they have puts them at risk. And there could be things that could be implemented early on that, may reduce that risk drastically. So even before they get to the point where they're worried about it, maybe an intervention like this could be useful.
Well, yeah, certainly the earlier we can get people, the better, I think. I mean, it's clear. because then people can do preventative things in order to forestall work disability. And I want to say that there is now a third study showing the effectiveness of a similar kind of intervention, just recently published in the United Kingdom. It was run by occupational therapists. They did use the work experience for people with conditions. So that does seem to be a key. It's been a key component of all three trials. So I think that seems to be a key component. Each intervention has been slightly different in other ways. But in the UK intervention, it was limited to people with inflammatory arthritis. But they didn't ask them if they had any concern. So some of them were enrolled without any particular concern, so they really with early intervention. And they also assessed them by a risk for work disability, and there was a portion, 6 out of 55, were thought to be low risk. So I think it can be valuable, for those individuals as well. I think one of the issues we want to talk about is we've got 3 trials now. The one in UK was simply a feasibility trial. One issue with that is, or one unique thing about that is they also use the work limitations questionnaire. They use the full questionnaire. That's the questionnaire that measures productivity. And they did find a positive effect. In the intervention group, there was an improvement in productivity at 9 months, and the effect size was a moderate effect size. So the use of, the effect of this intervention on productivity has yet to be finalized, but there's some suggestion that it is.
I was wondering too, and by the way, it's a great study, really interesting. Along those lines, I was wondering the reason for using, sort of t-tests to model the data over time. I'm not entirely convinced that it's not significant. We had other covariates like severity and disability or something, and controlling for baseline values. So I don't know, did you consider using GE and other models?
We did, and we've tried some other analyses as well, but since this was a randomized study, ultimately it sort of has to go on the strength of whether the randomized groups showed similar effects or not. We have done some other analyses. I don't think the baseline characteristics were pretty well aligned, so there weren't any factors that really stuck out as being poor matches between groups. I think we have looked at that a bit. I don't know. I'm trying to think how much of that is in the paper. I think there might be some secondary analyses. But
Yeah, not on that.
You can model the data over time to do time points, and you're just not taking advantage of the full potential of the data set. So modeling, putting it all in one model, all 3 time points, and certainly putting in baseline values of variable, I think it could be worth a second look.
we can certainly explore some more.
The other, in speaking of potential confounders or even subgroups, did you look at the type of occupation that they had, and was there a relationship there? Like, for example, if people who have higher physical demand occupation, did they actually respond better to the prevention program?
Yeah, we did look at the classification of jobs important to the labor department. Yeah, that classification, and we kind of divided them by professional, typical like white-collar jobs versus tend to be like a lot more typically manual than the other groups. But I can't remember the results of the differences.
I don't think we didn't bring that variable in, looking at
I don't
what
remember
that group was
that
more likely to.
I think, there weren't, the numbers were they weren't really balanced. There were a lot more people sort of with managerial.
Yeah.
If if there was a way to go back and look at that and tease that out, and when you're talking about implementing, it might give you who we should target for implementation.
But I'd like to point out that over half the sample are people with college. So this is interesting from a vocational rehabilitation point of view because that's a group that never receives any voc rehab service. And it's important that they feel a need for the service. The services seem to be effective. So that's an interesting point. There's a lot of hand use, even in white-collar jobs, and arthritis often affects hands, so that may be one explanation.
Oh my God, that is terrible.
And that, to me, would be considered a high-stress job.
Right.
Even though people think of it when you're sitting at a desk, you're using your hands sometimes all day long.
Right.
Other latter years, I don't know if you mentioned it, but even depression.
We did not collect any data on depression. We have data on satisfaction. We have data on fatigue. Stress. We did not collect data on smoking. I can't remember the numbers right off the top of my head. I think 70% of the sample. Majority of our white collar.
That was true in my study too. Right. Now, we've got 3 studies. One's just a feasibility study, but it was a randomized trial. But showing positive results. So we're feeling this ready for examination. I don't know what your thoughts are. More studies are needed, do you think, or randomized trials?
Well, I mean, I certainly think, from the potential for reducing the cost of absenteeism, there's a strong case. I think it's really, when you're talking about implementation on a broad scale, a lot of people have different opinions on, when is that ready. Some people want to see multiple trials across lots of different areas. But on the other hand, an institution or an industry or a company that sees the value of what we have, and they're willing to give it a try, to me, that would say you're ready to implement at least at that level. And then we can learn a little. And this just adds another piece of evidence to go forward on maybe a broader scale. So I'm sort of in the feeling like, I don't know that we necessarily have to wait until we have tons of evidence to decide whether something looks good. If you've got enough there that's a threshold for maybe a small entity, I would say go forward with it.
So then what would NTB, somebody to pay for it? Although the evidence suggests that some degree is acceptable, and there are a portion of people who pay for the cost, which is we're talking about 3 to 4 hours, 4 hours or an hour and a half. 3 hours in line, plus a phone call. They allowed 4.5 hours in the case study, but people don't use 4. At a follow-up. So this is an intervention. But who would take part of it? So this is a tricky. I think an employee insurer is probably the most likely entity now, and that's in UK now. Your thoughts on medical paying for it? Health insurers.
Yeah, I think that's where you get in. Perhaps they want to see a broader level of evidence before they respond. But one of the tacks maybe you could take, if you find an employer that's interested, they believe that your results will be good for them. That's somebody to partner with and start with. So, then if you can show at that level, that you're on the right track, I think then the health plan people
probably would be a little bit more excited about
like a work-based program, but I think we're going to care more about the other areas. That's a job loss.
We didn't present data, but we do show that the intervention does decrease days lost from work.
See, and that right there, I think, that's a big chunk of money.
UK study also showed that, so we
Yeah.
have some good evidence there.
Yeah.
I did not look at it.
Yeah.
But that shows a lot more interest.
Right.
Lawyers.
So that also speaks to when we're bringing things into implementation, we really need to know what they want on the other end of it. What's going to be meaningful to them? That's what we need to sell, and that's what we need to have the evidence to show that we can impact, and then how it fits within their system.
So for our study, we are.
Yes. Yeah, if we do it again. We have been interviewing people who took the. I'm sorry, there's someone who's joining us remotely who I think that doesn't have the mute on. So if all of you could please check to see if you have your mute on, because we're just getting a lot of background on our end.
We're going to ask all the discussants to speak a little more loudly so it's easier to hear.
Okay. And we will also speak a little bit louder and come closer to the mic. So we've been interviewing people who participated in our Work It study about the intervention, specifically where and how they would want it to be delivered and received. And what we've learned so far, we're still analyzing the data, but it's varied. Some people want it within the healthcare system, from their doctor, from their therapist. Some people don't, and they don't even want to go pay the extra copay for that. Some people want it within the employer, and some people don't. So I think we're going to really need to sort of be able to reach it in different ways and sort of leverage the people who are doing it across different systems, ultimately, as we get there.
I think there may be some opportunity for individuals in private practice here too, ultimately, if not now, because as I said, there are people who are self-pay for this.
Yeah.
And a practitioner also could partner with an employer or a nonprofit organization.
Yeah.
To help individuals who can't fully pay.
Yeah, and that's I think a voc rehab model that they're doing. I don't see that as much in PT and OT at this level, but maybe in the future. Okay. Do we have any questions from our people who are joining us online?
We do have some questions from the audience. Christina Tice asked about the study in the UK. Is it the study mentioned by Alison Hammond or a different one?
It's Alison Hammond, yes.
And do you think that the programs being community delivered is helpful for the participants, particularly for job loss, but may play a role in the lack of effect for job demand? By that, she means for participants in terms of not having to deal with much with disclosure, it's positive, but that could be a double-edged sword regarding job demands and accommodations. So having it take place outside of the workforce. Any comments on that?
I didn't quite get it, question.
The fact that the program is community delivered, it may be helpful for participants regarding the job loss, but they're not really being able to implement within a system of their job where they could be more effective in helping change or reduce demands.
Yes. Well, this is an issue, and it's interesting. I'll go back to the UK study. I mean, in my study, we found that most of the people really didn't want their employer to know at all. They were very concerned about that. I found that in a focus group. In the UK study, where their general voc rehab model is much more employer-oriented, involvement employer, they planned for that. People were allowed to have that, given that for free. Hardly anybody wanted it. So it seems idealistic to have the employer involved, but people really are concerned about that and don't want it.
And if I could add, this is Julie, but when we found in our follow-up interviews with people, several years out, people were saying, I'm still using what I learned in my job. So, certainly sounded to me like even though they got the information in the community setting, they were able to take it and use it to work with their employer effectively. I don't think it had to be embedded within the employer for that to happen. I think they got the skills to do that.
Some of the resources that they were given also were to enable them to approach an employer to ask for an accommodation in an appropriate manner, and also discuss the pros and cons of revealing one's situation to an employer.
Another question from Susan Foley. Prevention of job loss has major public policy implications. Do you know what happened to those that left their jobs, any enrolled or applied for Social Security disability benefits?
We don't know what happened when they left.
So again, the public policy of being able to prevent this job loss is significant financial consideration. Thank you.
I could comment on that if you wanted to.
Kind of in government that are usually getting more government funding for this at the government level program.
Social Security, unfortunately, is really only interested in people who will definitely apply for Social Security disability. They have looked at some job retention program studies. They have conducted 3. They were only people who were only eligible if they had applied or were waiting to get it. They're not interested in this kind of very early intervention. I know in my study, there were a few people who did, and there are also people who came into the program asking the therapist or the counselor in my trial about application for Social Security disability. They were interested in finding out more information about it.
Sounds like a good idea for a follow-up study, though, to see if you can contact those people and find out what happened to them. That might provide some good insight.
Yeah, it'd be nice to know if they went on any level of disability, how much it cost. Bring in some of the cost effectiveness. Cost effectiveness is complicated. I did talk about, we didn't plan for cost effectiveness going into the study. Then I talked to cost effectiveness people after we were done to say, can we look at cost effectiveness? And you sort of really need to plan it in advance to do a really good cost effectiveness study.
It sounds like there's 3, you want to disseminate to existing infrastructures, right? And so there's 3 on the table.
Yeah.
Workplace, government, and insured.
Right.
So maybe just trying to find out the pros and cons of each and
Yeah.
how you can get in there. I actually have a good local recommendation for you of somebody who did a whole workplace health company and
Perfect.
a whole program. So
That'd
I
be
can
great.
get that to you too.
That'd be great.
Nonprofits are another possibility.
That's a board possibility.
Yeah.
Okay. Should we move into study number 2, or are there other questions, Mary, that we should address?
We just have, I'm doing the questions here because we were getting static when we were trying to do them from another computer. But this is again from Christine. If I'm acting in the workplace as the interventionist, doesn't see the work environment, but the employee doesn't have to disclose. Could this protect the employee in terms of not having to disclose, but perhaps limit the employee's ability to express or implement accommodations? So similar follow-up to what we had discussed before.
So Christina, we can't really address that from our study, but it's a good question. We didn't specifically ask that, unfortunately, in our follow-up interviews, but I still feel that people liked getting it in the community. That was not a problem for people. And it seemed to me that they were able to use it in the context of their employer.
It seems to me when you give it to the individual and you allow them to approach the employer as necessary, they have total control over the situation. Right. If you go through an employer and it's employer involved or put on, then people lose control. Their situation becomes identified, and discrimination in the workplace does occur. Yeah. I mean, that said, in one previous study I conducted, a number of people who did disclose their employer were surprised at the positive response that they got from their employer.
Okay, so Mary, I'm trying to move on to the next slide, and we're not advancing. So, sorry, we had some technical difficulties on our end. I could just sit on top here a little. It was just stuck. Okay, it is unstuck now. All right, so now we're going to talk about our second clinical trial. This is the results of the Boston Overcoming Osteoarthritis Through Strength Training trial, or the BOOST study, which some of you have heard about. Kristen Baker was the PI on this study, and she was unable to be here today, so I will be presenting the results. So he got arthritis. What we know is that exercise works. We know that people who have arthritis can exercise. We know that exercise decreases pain and it improves functions. There are many clinical trials and many systematic reviews that show that if you have arthritis, it works. However, a lot of people who have arthritis are inactive, and many years ago, people who had arthritis were told to rest specifically and not do anything. But about 44% of people who have arthritis are inactive, and only about 13%, or even less than that, engage in recommended levels of strength training activities, both of which are recommended for exercise for people with arthritis specifically. So we have a gap, right? We know that exercise works, yet we have many people not exercising. So how are we going to bridge that gap? Well, with our modern day age of technology certainly seems to be something we want to think about, and it indeed has been used in many areas of adherence. Anyway, looking at health promotion areas. So, why technology, why not? Well, technology is part of our fabric. It's been there since the history of human race can be mapped using it. As it goes forward, there's innovations that make our lives easier. There's innovations that make our lives more difficult, particularly when they don't work. But it does allow us to expand our capacities further into the world and address limitations of human conditions, physically, cognitively, emotionally. But it also allows us to close gaps. It allows us to close gaps between getting people from perhaps working in the hospitals or in the clinics, and then connecting them in the home environment, bridging and closing down that gap between getting our experts into the home with them, at least in a virtual capacity. But from technology, we do know that technology use is increasing over time. This is probably not going to be surprising to anyone here. We also know that seniors right now are more likely to use a tablet or an e-book or a smartphone. Again, this is all technology. Landscape changes so quickly. This will all be very different within a matter of years. But the clinical trial that we did in our center was, does a community-based telephone counseling technology foster long-term adherence to strength training in adults with knee osteoarthritis? We call this the Boston Overcoming Osteoarthritis Through Strength Training BOOST study. I'm going to talk about our technology in specific for this. So the aims of BOOST were to examine whether participants who were randomized to an experimental telephone-linked communication system, or TLC for short, had a better 2-year exercise adherence compared to the control participants. This was our primary aim. And B, had better pain and function scores compared to control participants, which is our secondary aim. And then to examine whether people who had greater use of the technology had better adherence, also our secondary aim. This was a 2-year randomized controlled trial. We were registered in clinicaltrials.gov. We enrolled people from the greater Boston area between 2011 and 2013 and followed them for 2 years, and they were all members of community dwelling adults. To be eligible for the study, people needed to be age 50 or older. They needed to self-report a physician-diagnosed knee OA. They needed to have some knee pain, and we used markers of WOMAC pain score greater than or equal to 4 on most days, or knee pain on most days in the previous month. And they had to have the ability to use a telephone and have a telephone. Exclusion criteria were a medical condition precluding exercise, specifically inflammatory type conditions such as RA and psoriatic arthritis, we excluded. We excluded current regular strength training, people who were doing current regular strength training. If they were doing a walking program, that was fine. We were specifically targeting strength training programs. And we also excluded if people were planning for a total knee replacement during the trial, or if they had already had bilateral knee replacement, and then inability to follow exercise instructions. So this was our study timeline. At baseline, everyone came in and everyone participated in a 6-week strength training class that they participated in an evidence-based program that had been established with previous research to show that it decreased pain and improved function and strength with people with knee OA. Okay, so they received an exercise that had already been previously established as being positive. Then in the intervention group, they were then randomized. They were randomized then at 6 weeks after the intervention, and they were randomized into 2 groups. The intervention group received a biweekly call through the TLC system, which was really a motivational, goal-setting, barrier identification, problem-solving, sort of a strategy for them, which is an interactive phone call. And then they also received a monthly reminder call to log their exercises. Okay? The control group received the same monthly reminder calls to exercise. All right? That TLC interacted with people for a total of 24 months after they were randomized. And the intervention, the motivational TLC calls stopped at 18 months, actually. That's a little bit misleading on that, but they stopped at 18 months. Okay, they did not go full. After that 18 months, they continued to get the monthly reminder calls to log the exercise program. Okay? So the structure of the TLC conversations was the telephone calls the person, and they start by going through an assessment of this is a computer-activated system, so there's not a person on the other line. It's all computer generated by a digitized voice, and the voice asks people assesses the days of exercise that they've done in the previous 2 weeks, and it allows them to give some feedback. Then it can go into different scripts depending on what they've done. So if they're not exercising and they indicate that there might be some pain, it goes into a pain script. Then it helps them get into also some goal negotiation and goal setting as it goes through that. Okay, and then they also have a counseling script at the end where they might talk about building some confidence, self-efficacy, doing some buddy systems, looking into some support, those sorts of things. And then it will end. If they indicate that they're not doing any days and they have of exercise and they've fallen into a lapse, then there's some lapse script type of materials for them to help them get back on track. So in terms of the exercise counseling that the TLC script did to them, again, through the program, through the responses that participants generated, they would get into some information on self-efficacy, building your confidence, having conviction with exercise, social support, building bonds with people, finding friends, making training enjoyable. And then if they had questions about some education, such as injury prevention or tracking, they could go into those systems. They could self-choose where to go, or the script followed them, basically, given what they wanted to hear information on. So for our outcomes, the adherence was measured using the question from Kim Bonnell: how would you rate your level of adherence to this prescribed boost exercise program over the last 3 months? And the response was a Likert from 0 to 11, 0 to 11, I think. And then we used the Western Ontario, or the WOMAC, Western Ontario McMaster University's Osteoarthritis Index, the WOMAC, to measure pain and physical function subscales. We did timed up and go. We also looked at repeated 5-inch chair stands and stair ascents. And then we also assessed quadricep strength with the Biodex System 3. For analyses, we had an intent-to-treat approach with multiple imputation for missing data. We had a 24-month adherence evaluate then we looked at for adherence and 24-month adherence using linear regression, adjusting for baseline imbalances. And then for pain and function outcomes, we used the repeated measures using generalized estimating equations or the GEE approach. In terms of looking at our use of technology with adherence, we monitored pretty closely how the TLC was used, and we were able to identify the number of TLC calls that were connected to the other person, the calls that were completed with the other person, and then also the number of calls in which the counseling information was utilized by people as they got into the system, and we summed those scores. So in terms of our recruitment and retention, we enrolled 120 people. We had some drop early on during that run-in period. That was part of our 6-week exercise program. With that run-in period, we did have people withdrawn who did not complete their 6-week program, so they were dropped. We then randomized 104. We had 52 in the treatment and 52 in the control. And at follow-up time, we had 92% at 6 months. We dropped down at 12 months to 83, a little more at 79, and then we worked really hard to get back up to 24 months at 80, and got 87% back at 24 months. So here are our baseline characteristics of our participants. Mean age was 65, about 83% female. This is pretty typical with this sort of a population. There were no differences in these baseline characteristics between the control and the intervention groups. So this is looking at the mean level of adherence by treatment over our visits. And the control group is that top line in the blue, and the intervention group is that bottom dotted line in the red. And as you can see, there really was no difference in adherence over our time period using the measure that we looked at. Between our intervention groups, between our treatment and control groups. Likewise, with MOMAC pain, we also did not find a difference between the groups over time in terms of our intervention decreasing pain or with comparison to the other groups. And the same thing with MOMAC function. We also did not find a difference between the groups over time. So this is looking at these data slightly differently. We're also looking at differences, and there are different scores between all of our outcomes that we looked at. Again, none of them showing any difference. The quadriceps strength approaches a little bit, so it's the one that close looks like there might be something there closest. That also was not significant. However, if we start looking into a little bit of who used the technology and did the usage of the technology have an impact on people's behaviors, then we start finding perhaps that there's some additional things that we might want to think about moving this work forward or how to interpret it. But we did find a moderate correlation between use of the TLC and better adherence. So people who were the total number of calls that people received, as well as the total number of calls that people went through in an assessment period, and then the total number of calls that people got into the counseling part of that program was moderately correlated with the 24-month adherence. So we have some limitations to the study. Measurement of adherence was challenging. Measurement of strength training adherence is challenging anyway in the field. That can be a whole nother talk. I think in order to really start looking at understanding adherence with these sorts of studies, we really need to figure out how to measure adherence to what we're doing. We initially wanted to do logs for our adherence measures. We had a large number of missing data in our logs, so early on, that's why we switched to the single item that has been validated with Kim Bunnell. But the adherence was hard for us to collect. We then utilized this new validated measure of self-reported adherence, and we can't compare it to others a whole lot yet. And there's also no gold standard of exercise adherence assessment right now. We also had some challenges with delivery of the technology. We had some missed calls with the the group that we were with to sort of monitor this, which it worked out. We only missed, I can't remember how many we missed early on, but we were able to get back on track with them, and we were able to identify it. It just took a lot of effort on our end to make sure that the technology was indeed working the way it was supposed to be. So you definitely need a lot of close monitoring. So in conclusion then, our TLC motivational technology did not improve exercise adherence compared to a monthly reminder from the TLC system. And we also have some evidence that people who engaged more with the TLC system had better adherence. However, there were people in the intervention arm who did not utilize the TLC motivational technology. And likewise, in a related study, in a ancillary study and some qualitative work that we've been doing with this over the past couple of years, we found people in the control group who really liked getting that control call, that it was enough to help them get the message. So we did have an active control. So let me take a moment to thank our staff, who were great, and Mara and Faye and Liz, and all of our interventionists, site participants, and our clinical epidemiology colleagues, and then our advisory boards as well. And thank our funders. Without NIDR, we could not have done this work, and the National Institutes of Health, and then some of the Arthritis Foundation that has started some of the preliminary work for what we've been doing. And with that, I think I can thank you for listening, and we will open it up for discussion.
Just one quick question. You had dosage analysis, which is a really great idea. So you did number connected, number completed. Did you do number of minutes on the phone? Because it's a continuous variable and it might give you a little more power.
Yeah, that's a good question. We did not do number of minutes on the phone. If you got into number of minutes, the counseling script was later in that. So if we got them into the counseling part of it, it would have meant that they would have gotten into it. But the longest telephone call was about 6 minutes, right? I think
that's about right.
Yeah, but we have it. We could look at that.
And number of minutes.
Number of minutes.
It is more to this response.
Sure.
And model that.
Yep.
So, and what was the shortest?
For those of you not here, I hung up the phone. Some people got off quick. Some people were just, they knew it was going to be, some people in the intervention arm told us they got bored of it.
Yeah. How many of those minutes were just assessment? And I wonder if that kind of set them up. There was too much assessment in the beginning, and then they had to wait a while to get stuff.
Yeah. I don't know. Kristen would know that, and I don't know the detail of that. I know she tried to make it brief. But that's something to think about for sure. Are you getting people bored off initially, and how not to overburden people so that they can get to the material that's going to help them quicker? Yeah. So our work with this is we're starting to move it into a mobile health platform, as Belinda knows because she's helping me with this. But that would allow that people to have a little bit more of that flexibility too, in terms of getting to what's going to be most beneficial to them quicker.
And in terms of adherence, are you going to plan on doing the passive sensing to look at exercise adherence rather than self-report?
Well, we're trying to come up with a way that we can actually measure it in the home more objectively using other mobile health technology. So there's a lot of wearable devices right now. We're trying to figure out if we can use some wearable devices to measure strengthening. And so we want them. So what we're trying to do with this study, and I had a conversation with Kelly earlier, so it'd be interesting to have a different approach to the study. But what we want people to do is to do squats and to do step-ups. So how do you measure the performance of squats and step-ups in the home setting in terms of using wearable technologies.
Well, you could embed the device right into the step-up thing that you give them. You know, I mean, of course, the dog could be stepping up, and you don't know if it's actually person,
Yeah.
but
I'm right now we've got a small study with someone who develops wearable clothing that may be able to help us figure that out. So we're trying to figure out if we can capture in a valid way the exercises that we're having them perform.
I just figured, I guess, that, you know, there are people who have the objective scales that measure weight, it could be the same thing for the step up, and then you can have a remote connection to your staff, and when they're not stepping up, then you could.
Yeah, I think it's not just step up, if we can get something on the body.
Okay.
So
I had a different observation of the study we could come back to, but while we're on this topic, I don't want to rain on the parade, but I think looking at squats and step-up exercise and things like that is really way too narrow. And I think it stems from you had asked me a question earlier, what's needed in NEOA exercise? And I really feel we need to rethink what should drive that. And traditionally, it's been impairment driven. And, you know, there is a logic to that in that, you know, you have loss of joint motion or loss of strength. If I fix that, I'll now be able to function better. So I'm going to focus on those things in rehab, and then I'm going to see how it affects functioning. And I think maybe we should kind of reverse that a little bit and let the function problems and the things that people want to be able to do but they can't do now, that should be what drives our approach. And in that, there's going to be impairments that we're going to identify, but they're going to be directly related to the things that they want to do and can't do in the first place. And if you're thinking about adherence, I think taking that approach immediately makes anything else we do relevant. And I think that'll go a long way for adherence. So if we've been starting to use that approach, you know, I don't have data to say that it's better. I think it's promising. We just published a case report recently, and it shows promise. But I mean, there's a lot more that has to be done. But people seem to really appreciate that approach. And everything else, you're still going to do strengthening, and you're still going to address joint motion problems where they exist. But you're also going to be thinking about, well, you know, maybe there's a different way you could do this task.
right.
Maybe there's assistive devices and things like that that need to come into place that gives you a broader scope. So if I was, and I think in the beginning, some people have impairment problems that, you know, you have to get over that, or they can't even do the functional task. So I'm not saying throw out the impairment-based approach, but if it's all done in the context of the functional problem, it's going to provide the relevance. And then, you know, from there, I don't think I would be interested in how many squats they do. I'd be more interested in, well, you couldn't get up and down out of a chair before, so how often are you doing that now? And has that led to you being able to get in and out of your car better? And, you know, because of that, are you participating more in the things you want to participate in the community? So,
I think the missing piece, so first of all, let me backtrack a little bit. So the strengthening exercises that are done in this program are embedded in some functional capacity stuff too. So they do some walking and that sort of stuff. So, and I agree with you, I mean, we've talked about this, and I agree with you that I think being more functionally based in terms of the approach will help people adopt a lifestyle that is going to be active. But the measurement of that active lifestyle, and if for those who need to do strengthening, to measure, because if we're going to still have these programs and we tell them that they should strengthen, even if you're working on the function, there's still a strengthening component, so they've got to do this in some context. We still have to be able to measure that they're doing it, so that we can know what the outcome is related to that they're doing it. Because this is where we struggle in terms of this exercise, and you send them home, and we don't know if they're doing it.
That's why I mentioned 0.5%, sounded like there's people, I mean, in response to your data, that people weren't coming out to labs, and then of those who are, it's still self-reported. So, so is there some way to combine, objective and self-reported, maybe get a little bit more objective, but some.
So we're working now with a group that does smart socks technology, and we can get the walking, and we can get the activity, and we can figure out if they're at least doing the exercises. Because it might be that we tell them to do the exercises, and maybe they just want to walk more, and they don't need to do the exercises. We don't know.
So that's sort of my point as well, that, these exercise programs we put on, we give people. And then, we're all looking to see, are they still doing it 2 years later? Nobody wants to do that 2 years later. They want to get on with, they'll do the exercise to the point where now I can do my activity, or skate, or play basketball, or whatever it is they want to do. And that becomes the thing that takes over, and that's not bad, So, so I think I see, the need for being able to determine are people doing their exercises and follow through. But that might be more of a, to expect things beyond a relatively short term. And then the target might change to something that's a lot more related to participation. Are they just moving?
That's a really interesting comment, Kelly, because I think that from the exercise adherence literature in the field, there's a lot of it, long-term adherence to exercise programs, but I think your point's well taken. Who wants to do the same strength training program over 2 years? People want to transition. We want them to transition so that they're actually using that strength more in the context of daily life. And so then how do you measure that transition piece from
on the cost of sensing this, but even just their GPS, are they, and then their cell phone, are they just before their world was this big and now they're,
to me that would be
that improves mood and, other indicators too.
And get all the positive benefits that, people are showing that people can get from just being more active. And I think that would be a really good surrogate. If my world was only, 2 blocks square and now I'm all over the place and traveling and all those types of things, that's an active person.
And you could even get down to the fact they went only in these 3 rooms in their house and they go out of their house, and you can get very micro with it.
One of the reactions I had to the results, so whenever you get a negative result or you don't find a difference, the knee jerk is, well, it's really not worth the effort. But then you show the data where, for those that actually engaged, you had more of a relationship with their adherence scores. How did they compare to those that were just in the control group? Was there more separation in the adherence then? Do you know?
I don't know if we've looked at that.
We haven't really looked at that specifically.
Because I think what that would lend itself to is, if you start to see more separation there, to me that suggests, well, that technology is good for some people, and maybe the other one is good for other people.
Yeah.
And, there's probably, I'm just thinking of, some people would get annoyed by being bothered monthly. Other people would really appreciate having it. Some people are data driven, so if they get provided with it, that'll make them do more. Other people don't need that. So I think your data does show that this is still worth it. It's like everything else, every other intervention we talk about, even in medicine, the right intervention for the right people at the right time.
We did one of my doctoral students, Aileen Lettingham, has been doing a qualitative study and on people who were participated in the BOOST study, and she found sort of what you're talking about. There were people who were in the control arm who got the monthly call who loved it. They're like, I love having it's just someone to check up on me. You care. And that's just for one monthly reminder to have someone check up to make sure I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing was enough for them, and they loved it. And they talked about it at hearing. Then we had people in the intervention arm who said, I am so bored. I don't want to hear them again. And they clearly did not want to do it. We heard people in the intervention arm who loved it, who said it was really helpful for them, it helped them goal set, and they used it. I mean, there were clearly people who used it and who did the goal setting and talked about that and talked about finding space in their home and talked about overcoming injuries, and you could tell they definitely used it. Then there were people in both arms that said, you know, what I wanted was more of a social engagement. I liked the exercise class. I liked being with other people. I liked the exercise instructor in the exercise class. It made me feel really safe to exercise because they were so good and so knowledgeable. And, you know, they liked the demonstration. They're just more those visual learners, those, you know, the people who are driven by more of these external sources, which we did not have any of that in the TLC technology going home. So in moving forward with the work that we're doing now, as I start bringing this into a mobile health platform, I'm trying to figure out how we develop that social component to sort of match with that internal goal setting, internal assessment, and those people who can learn that way, because it did work for some. I agree with you, Kelly. I mean, it did work for some. The other thing we need to do is figure out which technology is going to work for which people.
That's right.
So who wants one versus the other? You know, who wants just a monthly generic call and that's all they need, and that's great, and that's all they need? Who needs other different packages? So we need to figure out what those packages are, and then figure out how, you know, how to assess the needs of people to those packages. Do we have any? I'm trying to see if there are any questions in the audience. We do have some questions from the audience. So let's start with. Are these findings impressive?
Yeah, so first question, are these findings impressive as well? Thank you for sharing the results of both of these innovative projects.
So the work study is accepted. The boost study is almost submitted. It will be submitted probably in a week. Very close.
Next question, Jane Huggins. Do you know of a good app that can be used to track activity, exercise, symptoms, medication, supplements? Did you track medications and supplements during the study?
We did not track medications and supplements during the study. It's a great idea. I know the Arthritis Foundation has a Track and React app, but I don't know how extensive it is. I haven't looked at it for a while. But the place I would go is to look with the Arthritis Foundation. Beyond that, I don't know of any. And I think what a lot of these apps are doing is really giving people that feedback in terms of linking everything together. So how do these self-management behaviors have a result on the outcome?
I mean, they're evidence-based.
Yeah. So then you get into evidence-based and use and all that sort of stuff. But then the theory.
It's worrying. I mean, there should be a paper that somebody writes it if they haven't already. Like, are there to rate these apps?
Yeah.
Arthritis, exercise apps, or any iatrogenic? Like, right.
Right. And then what we're trying to do, what I'm trying to do, and Belinda as well, is, you know, we're trying to develop the apps also with being integrated with the technology and the monitoring, but the behavior science to help people change those behaviors and use that theory and those frameworks.
And Linda Jones asked, could it be that the monthly calls were not often enough, particularly in the beginning? It is thought that it takes about 6 weeks to create a habit, so maybe more frequent calls in the beginning could have helped. Yeah, possible. We couldn't look at that in any way, but that's a nice thought, Linda.
Yeah, well, we have, for my study, we did counseling calls It always started with more in the beginning and then tapered off.
Mm-hmm. The intervention group would have gotten more calls. They would have gotten the biweekly.
Of the two days we did.
Yes, the control group did not.
Okay. We have,
I introduced you, right?
Mhm.
So I just wanted to take a moment to introduce Rowan Alvarez. She was our first speaker addressing the work study. I was just told that I missed some people here. Okay, so thank you everyone. This is going to wrap up. For those of you who joined us remotely, thank you for being with us. You had great questions. It was nice to see all of your names again. And thank you very much for those of you here, Kelly and Belinda and Sarah Lynn in particular. Thank you for coming, and for everyone else who came to join us today. Thank you.